Hey tribes, good to see you. Today I am joined by Andy and Stu, and we are going to look at James. I'm just going to read some scripture first of all. James 1:22, if you want to follow along. It simply says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves, do what it says. Stu, would you like to unpack that a bit for us?
So I think it's pretty clear that James is taking a leaf out of Jesus' book. Obviously, James and Jesus were half brothers. And throughout the ministry of Jesus, we see a way of teaching which isn't just wanting to create brains on sticks. It's not just wanting to create disciples that just know lots of things. The way of Jesus, I love how Matthew puts it in Matthew 11 of describing the way of Jesus, which is walk with me and work with me, watch how I do it. It's not listen to what I say. It's actually Jesus, like a master's inviting an apprentice to come and see what he's doing and then go on and put it into practice. Ultimately, the way of Jesus is incredibly embodied. The word becomes flesh and moves into the neighbourhood. It's not just hearing, it is also doing. Yeah. And I particularly love how Jesus closes out what is arguably the greatest sermon ever penned or ever spoken, which is the Sermon on the Mount. And he closes it out by saying this in Matthew 7. So he said everything from loving your enemies to here's how you should pray. He's covered the whole lot. And he finishes off by saying this, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. So for Jesus, it's not just hearing the Sermon on the Mount that's the point, it's actually putting it into practice. And whenever we put it into practice, ultimately we become like a wise builder who builds their house on a rock, not on sand. And so I think there's two things here for Jesus. It is, yes, hearing is really important, but ultimately his way is all about the doing. And as we step into action, as we step into practice, ultimately we become the wise.
That's really helpful. So Andy, really practically, how do we put that into practice? How do we live that out?
Yeah, so I think it's actually quite simple, but quite hard. It is do what he says. Like, so when Jesus says it's better to give than to get, like, go try that.
Yeah.
Like, live in a way that's trying to give more than you're trying to grab and get.
Yeah.
When Jesus says, pray for those who hate you or persecute you, like, he means pray blessing on those that you find hard to love and live with.
Yeah.
Like, it is as simple as that and as hard as that.
Yeah.
But watch what happens as you pray for people that you don't like. Like, if you've got a work colleague that you're really struggling with, I know you do.
Harsh.
I'm only joking. But like, if someone's listening and they have a work colleague that they're really struggling with, pray for them on the way into work every day.
Yeah.
And watch what happens. Yeah. Now, what might happen is that colleague's behaviour completely changes and all of a sudden you find them easy to like.
Yeah.
That's probably unlikely. What will happen is the shape of your internal world will change. And then your relationship to the person that you're finding difficult changes, which is back to what we were talking about the last time around. It's about inner transformation that leads to a different way of living in this world. Or the way we talked about last time was living in and out of a different realm. And so what does it look like to not just be hearers but doers? It requires us to do and to not make it difficult or complicated.
Yeah.
Like, so Jesus says that we are to forgive. So forgive.
Yeah.
Now, simple but hard.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what's really important. We live in a world that has never had access to more knowledge at any other time in human history. Like, I remember, my kids say I grew up in the olden days. I remember the Encyclopedia Britannica. Where, like, if you want to know something, you go and find the book, you got to find the thing and the right volume and find it in the contents or an index in the back and then hope that whoever had written that particular one had the question that you had in your mind whenever they were writing about that particular subject. Well, we don't even need to type it in anymore.
Yeah.
We just need to, hey Siri, how far is it from here to Chicago?
Yeah.
and you get an answer. Like, we've never in human history had access to more knowledge, and arguably we have never been more lacking in wisdom. And what is that? Wisdom is knowledge correctly applied. Do we do what we say we know?
Yes.
It's like, I hope this isn't too and maybe hard to hear for some people, but it's like the grossly unhealthy doctor. Now, they know all the things about health, but they're not wise. Like, they know that their relationship to food or alcohol or exercise or whatever is not healthy. They know that it's not, but they do it anyway. That's the absence of wisdom in the presence of knowledge. And as a culture, we know how to be impressed by knowledge, and we don't really know what wisdom looks like, because wisdom isn't glamorous.
Just to bounce it off that, I think it's whenever it comes to the teachings of Jesus, because Andy's so right, and it's important for us to realise that Jesus wasn't just teaching us ideas, he was teaching us his own lifestyle. So whenever you look at the Sermon on the Mount, he did everything. He was the one that embodied that. And I think what you're speaking to, which I think is really important, is the danger of the modern age is just people are just spouting ideas. And yet Jesus has so much integrity with not just what he's saying, but actually behind the scenes, he did it all. And I think ultimately we're looking for that kind of wisdom. It's not just, here, this is a great idea, this will be good for you, you should go and do it, and behind the scenes, nobody's actually doing it. Throughout the life of Jesus, it's so congruent. Everything he taught us to do, he did himself. And ultimately by his Spirit, he wants to show us and empower us how to do it also. And so I think it's why the teachings of Jesus and what James is speaking to here is so unique, and it's so important for us to get this, that he makes a way for us to not just hear it, but actually to do it because he went there first.
That's really helpful. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but how would you define maturity?
I think this is so funny for people that have maybe been around church for a long time, because I think sometimes we define it as knowledge.
Yeah.
Like, how much do you know?
Yeah.
Do you know all the books of the Bible? Do you know where certain verses are? Do you know this aspect of church history? Or it's all about, do we have knowledge? Which I don't think is a biblical definition of maturity at all. For me, my metric for Christian maturity is obedience.
Yeah.
Do we do what he says? So from the moment you feel clear on what Jesus is asking you to do, the time from you're clear on what he's asking you to do till you execute that is your metric on maturity.
That's good.
And the most mature person is the person whose time or the distance is the shortest. So what's really interesting is, and maybe slightly tragic, is for some of us, our maturity journey is actually in reverse. So like the moment we come alive in Jesus, we're actually more mature than we are 10 years down the road. Because the moment we come alive in Jesus, we're alive to him. We want to do what he says, and we're all discovering it. 10 years later, we've tried it. We need to think about it. There's more complexity in our lives, and that we've lost that sense of sensitivity and reactivity to God says, I'm going to do this, so I'm going to do it.
That's really helpful, Andy. Thank you. As we come to close, guys, it might be really helpful just to take some time to chat with each other and just to ask that question, like, what was the last thing that God said to you and what did you do about it? And then actually take a few moments and just think, like, what's God speaking to each of you about now? And also, what are you going to do about it? So have fun with that, and we'll see you soon.